That's right. Yeah. Well, Kathy and Jerry, right? Yeah. Well, regardless of my ineptitude, thanks so much for doing that. Very generous and really appreciate it. If you're here tonight, you probably know that the title of our presentation is the African American Heritage Sites in Sioux Falls with Dr. Will Wright and Zach Van Harris Jr. We're very happy to have them here tonight, and I know they're just going to do a super job. If you've read your newsletter, which most of you get, if you're members, if you're not, join up. You'll get one every month. And you can kind of see their biographies, and you'll hear more about that tonight when Sam introduces them a little bit later. A couple things I want to remind you of. One, as we do every week, we have the 50-50 drawing. We got a big crowd here tonight, so if you participate in that, if you all do, there's more money in the 50-50. 50% goes to us, and 50% whoever goes to whoever gets the lucky number drawn here tonight. And that's a great way to support us in the things we do, our history talks and our historical markers and other activities that we have. A couple of other things that I do want to mention. Also, I noticed most of you already have seen it. We have our giveaway tables back there. There's 2 tables that say free. Anything on there you can take home with you. And if you take all of it home with you, that would be great. It's good stuff, but we have copies of everything that's on there. We don't need 10 copies of everything, so feel free to take it all with you. The other table, a little more valuable things, kind of a silent auction deal. If you want to put a bid in on something like that, I'll be more than happy to let you do that, and hopefully you'll get to take something like that home. If you remember last month, I mentioned, there's this issue with the Brockhouse collection. And if you've been reading the newspapers, you've noticed that the city council had voted on it, that to sell those to the Notre Dame collection and a couple of other places, but there's still a petition out to keep them here. And if you feel strongly about that, Jim Carlson, Jim, hold up your hand there, and Jim has got a petition. He's got the petition right over there in the window, and the petition is to bring that to a vote. Is that correct, Jim? Okay, so if you do...
They didn't sell them.
They didn't sell them. Okay, all right. Jim will clarify any mistakes that I made. As you've already seen, I'm very capable of doing that. But good news today, the Barracks of Fort Dakota historical marker has arrived. And what does that mean? Well, for many years there was a historical marker which was on the side of the Hollywood Theater on North Phillips Avenue. And when they tore that down, apparently the construction guys weren't as appreciative of the historical markers as we are. And somehow it got thrown into a dump truck or somewhere like that and disappeared. Well, very fortunate, another one of our generous benefactors is the Daughters of the American Revolution, and they wanted to see it back. So they put up the money, and we had it made, and it just arrived today. So sometime maybe in April, it will be reinstalled. And the Daughters of the American Revolution are planning a reinstallation dedication, at some time. So watch the newsletters or your emails, and you'll see when that's going to happen. Okay, so just upcoming events. I think we announced last month that the March talk would be a Sanford history. But for various reasons, Sanford wasn't able to do that. So we have a replacement, and it's going to be the South Dakota Veteran Stories. We scraped up a couple of guys. We tore them away from their jobs at Ralph Super Value in Beersford, former alums. Our board member, Steve Lindquist, and this other ugly puss up there. Anyway, going to give a talk on some World War II veterans that were in our family. And, you know, over 16 million people served in World War II. So I'd be surprised if there's many in here that don't have some connection, some relative, a grandfather, a dad, an uncle, or something like that that served over there. And they may or may not have shared their stories. Well, Steve and I have researched a couple of ours, and it just so happens there, I don't know how many medals do you think there were amongst those that bunch, Steve? At least half a dozen or 8. You know, it's very surprising when people are put in a position what they're able to do, and we have the pride and fortune of uncles and fathers-in-laws that did serve, and we're going to share those stories next month. And that will be sponsored by Performance Press. Performance Press is the printing company that prints our very nice newsletters every month, and they do a great job, and they've generously stepped forward to be a sponsor for our history talks and history pages next month. They do a great work in printing. If you have any, I'll give them a little pitch. If you have any printing work that you need to have done, they'll do it. All we do is supply them with the files, and they print it, and they put the mailing labels on it, they take the postage on it, and then they take it down to the post office, and it's all done. And they do an excellent job of that. Following months, April will be our annual meeting. That will be right here at the old Courthouse Museum. So will the veterans stories will be here. And our talk will be the Little Raiders, and our speaker will be Randy Maygard. And as we do, we have our annual meeting and dinner that night, and it's always a nice event, so you're all welcome to come to that. I think our Tim, what's our, was it $25? Tim? Somewhere around that. Yeah. Okay. And in May, our program will be, we're going to have a joint meeting with the Genealogy Society, and that's sponsored by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And then in June, our annual ice cream and pie social, which is going to be in the Hartford Park. And that's sponsored by the Manifold family, who provide the pie and the ice cream and everything else that goes with it. So keep those on your calendar. Another event, it's not our event, but it's kind of our sister organization up here, and that's the Sioux Valley Genealogy Society. Their March meeting is going to be on German ancestry. And their speaker is going to be Sarah Boos Spencer, and that's on March 6th at 7 o'clock a.m. Just to give you a little description they sent me, it says, are you one of millions of Americans whose ancestors came from Germany? What do we mean by Germany? This talk will set the stage by describing social, cultural, political, and economic conditions in the areas that were or became Germany. Then we will discuss useful sources for finding the town or region in Germany they came from, followed by a brief introduction to the German civil and religious records available online. Finally, if you have a German name you have been stuck on, bring the name and date, and let's dig into your German roots together. Again, that's Thursday, March 6th at 7 o'clock. And even if you aren't German, I know my wife and I, we're going to Denmark and Sweden this year, and the same processes kind of apply. So if you're interested in whether it's Germany or Denmark or Netherlands or Scotland or whatever it is, you might learn something that'll be helpful in discovering your family roots as well. Okay, well, let's get on to some other roots here tonight. That's kind of what we're here for. And to introduce our speakers, I'm going to ask, put this up here. I'm going to ask Kevin, Sam Alke to come up here and introduce them. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to introduce our two speakers tonight. As many of us know, February is Black History Month, so it is fitting that we have two speakers that will inform us about Black history in Sioux Falls. Dr. Will Wright joined Augustana University in 2022 as an assistant professor of history after completing his PhD at Montana State University. One of Will's specializations is teaching public history. Dr. Wright believes that history should function as a benefit and service to the community. Zach Van Harris is a researcher, content creator, and social scientist with a background in anthropology and sociology from Alma College. Zach also completed studies in filmmaking from Film North. Zach has been active with the South Dakota African American History Museum since 2017. Zach started out as a student researcher and has been president and curator for that organization since 2024. Last fall, Will and Zach organized a roundtable discussion at Augustana University during homecoming week. The panel consisted of a group of African American students that attended Augustana during the period of 1968 1972. The panel was asked questions about what it was like to live here in Sioux Falls as a minority. One important accomplishment that came out of this discussion was to create a room on campus for African American students denied to them in 1972. Let's welcome Will and Zach.
Can you hear us okay? We might have to.
Well, thank you for having us this evening. We're excited to share these stories, uplift these stories. The origins for this research actually stemmed from 2 years ago when Zach and I got a grant from the city's Board of Historic Preservation to try to identify and document African American heritage sites in Sioux Falls for the purposes of historic preservation. So we want to find out where the Black community lived, worked, recreated, worshipped, and see why these sites were significant to the Black community from the 1870s to 1970s. And so tonight we would like to share 10 places that matter for the African American experience and the stories that come along with them. We've identified or split up this talk into 3 sort of historical eras that show the evolution and progression of the Black community here in Sioux Falls.
The first era that we are diving into is what we call the Black Pioneer era. And so from this era, African Americans' presence in South Dakota stretches back to the Dakota Territory days. Earliest arrivals were either enslaved or formerly enslaved Black people who oftentimes had arrangements with white explorers like York with Lewis and Clark, settlers like the Preacher Marchbanks with managing the boarding house of the father of the Smith mine, or government officials like Buffalo Soldiers. Others braved the prairie lands on their own accord with hopes to establish roots and start a new life. So South Dakota, in its relationship to the African American community, has its roots that travel back centuries. During the autumn of 1804, an enslaved Black man named York, owned by William Clark, acted as an intercultural arbiter for the Lewis and Clark voyage of discovery expedition that crossed into the Dakota Territory, making York actually the first documented African American on record to have stepped foot into this region. So why is York important? His presence was the first seed planted for Black people to put down roots and sprout up success in the state with entrepreneur endeavors such as land owning, homesteading, and owning property. After President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, former enslaved people migrated from southern plantation states, as you know, to the north, east, and west, looking for a new life, new opportunities, and a new place to call home. Okay, so the pioneer era of the 1870s through the 1910s. Now, while we do not have an actual photo of Dr. Richard Lamb, the image above here is from the Library of Congress to kind of help us paint a picture of what a common black barbershop in the late 19th century would look like. So why are we showing a barbershop? Well, a few places that African Americans long have found solace in were their homes, their places of worship, and their barbershops. Some may attest that this is still ringing true today. Dr. Richard Lamb was one of the early black pioneers to call Sioux Falls home. Sioux Falls was incorporated as a village in 1877. Dr. Lamb was born in 1832 in Newcastle, Indiana. He attended medical college in Ohio, then was an apprentice for a local physician in the 1870s. Sioux Falls, again, incorporated as a village 1877. 1878, Dr. Richard Lamb married Agnes Killian. So in the beginning, we was talking about German ancestry. Agnes Killian was the daughter of German immigrants in Casson, Minnesota. That same year, the newly wedded interracial couple relocated 230 miles west to Sioux Falls. 1878, that designates Dr. Lamb as the first African American in Sioux Falls and the first black physician barber. Owning property in Sioux Falls was uncommon for African Americans at the time, yet in 1879, Dr. Lamb opened his doctor clinic / barbershop at 130 and a half South Phillips Avenue. Physician, barber, clean shave, and a tonic for ailment. Yes, the dual role of a barber physician was not an unusual scope of practice. For centuries, barbers in Western and Northern Europe didn't just cut hair, they also performed a range of surgeries, from amputations, tooth extractions, bloodletting, and stitches, to name a few. Early barber surgeons trained in extended apprenticeship, just like Dr. Lamb, and their legacy can still be seen today in the red and white stripes on the barber folds, which represent the blood and the bandages used by their pre-modern counterparts. So, Dr. Lamb's Barber Physician Clinic at 130 and a half South Phillips Avenue is the current day location of PAVE. He acquired multiple properties in Sioux Falls, including his residency with his wife Agnes at 515 South Main Avenue and 2 other downtown lots, as well as land in Lenox, abutting a spur line of the Great Northern Railroad. After he passed in 1897, his beneficiaries sold his residential property for $1,000 to a Swedish Baptist church in 1903. When Richard Lamb's business was in operation, black barbers earned roughly equal wages on average compared to their white counterparts in the same occupation. Accessible employment outside of military for men for African Americans was oftentimes limited to positions of service industries like cooking, cleaning, various types of physical laboring, such as working in meatpacking facilities. We'll go to the next. Dr. Lamb had a huge impact in Sioux Falls, and his success was instrumental in helping recruit more black people to the area. Richard Lamb's success was used as a recruiting tool to bring more black people to this region. In Yankton, there was a fellow named C.C. Yancey. Also, he went by Tom Douglas. He was a formerly enslaved black man, and his Northwestern homestead movement traveled up and down the Missouri and Mississippi by steamboat, recruiting black folks to relocate to the Dakota Territory. By the early 1880s, there were enough black folks in Yankton that established businesses and homes that in 1883 they formed the AME congregation. Henry and his wife Mary Fristow Blakely and his brother Isaac Blakely of Forest Green, Missouri, they heeded Tom Douglas's call and settled in Yankton in 1905. They held important positions in that AME church and had been very vital in its preservation. In the middle of South Dakota, you have Sully County Blair Colony, which was founded and land owned and homesteaded by Norville Blair. That's who you see in the photo here. The Blair family, they were originally from Illinois. Norvell sent his sons Benjamin and Patrick to investigate the area in 1883 for settlement, and then Norvell came the next year to homestead the land. Before coming to South Dakota, he earned his financial success from farming and breeding racehorses. His wealth and his influence attracted many other black families to what became known as Blair Colony, also known as Sully County Colored Colony. In other parts of the state, black folks also came because of the opportunities here, such as Wilbur B. Wright, which I'll let Dr. Wright introduce you to.
So Wilbur B. Wright, in some ways, built on the precedent that Dr. Richard Lamb set. During the late 19th century, Sioux Falls was a growing city, attracting newcomers to this frontier via railroad system. Along with that, provided new employment opportunities. Barbers, as Zach talked about, but also as luggage porters. And this centered on a place called the Cataract Hotel, which opened in 1871 at the corner of 9th Street and Phillips Avenue, where black men were often employed as barbers, luggage porters, serving the guests at this sort of bustling downtown location. And so Wilbur B. Wright opened his own barbershop 2 blocks away from the Cataract Hotel in downtown Sioux Falls, first operating under the name Manning and Wright, then on Wright and Banks, and then finally the Central Barbershop, with the name sort of connoting that he came from a secondary owner or partner to the sole or primary partner at this business site. He grew his business and utilized the latest techniques to serve his clients or patrons. The Argus Leader even brags about this hair loss prevention product that Wright was able to innovate, in which he provided or would rub a vegetable-based compound on the scalps of his clients. They were impressed. And Wright's business continued to grow, where he mentored other black barbers, such as Harvey Mitchell, John Ernest, and John Dorsey, becoming one of the premier downtown barbershops. Due to this economic success, Wright was able to purchase a home at 923 North Dakota Avenue, where he lived with his wife Alice. Keep in mind that during this time period, the United States is still a nation of renters. Most people do not own their own home. Nationwide, it's about 45% in 1900, but for black families, it's even less. It's about 20%. So in some ways, Wilbur Wright's story is exceptional. Not only was Wright a respected businessman, but he also had high community standing. An example of that is on October 11th, 1889, President William McKinley comes to visit Sioux Falls. And as part of that welcome committee, you have many sort of white dignitaries, lawyers, bankers, judges, bishops, and Wilbur Wright happened to be the sole black man as part of that welcoming committee. And so I think it shows sort of his community standing within Sioux Falls. And he was able to set a precedent as a successful entrepreneur in a predominantly white city, setting it for future African-American business owners such as Harvey Mitchell, Daniel Coates, Maurice Coakley in the future.
In 1917, a young, small group of African-American teenagers in Sioux Falls, they yearned for a religious community to call their own, a community that would meet in fellowship and give support to one another during trying times. Their voices were heard and a congregation was formed. That congregation originally met in the old city hall where a white minister, Reverend A.K. Gibbs, led worship services. The small flock eventually coined the name St. John's in 1920 and continued to meet in a courtroom until 1930 when they purchased a former Jewish synagogue. Reverend Matthew Withers took over as head of the congregation in 1918, serving for some 20-odd years and overseeing tremendous growth in the congregation size. Sioux Falls St. John's Baptist Church helped provide space for African Americans to not only join in religious worship, but to unite as a community. From 1970 to 1980s, the congregation formed the social epicenter of Black life. The church building remained at the site until it was demolished in the late 1980s, and that's now the site of Van Epps Park. So remember those teens who were vocal about the formation of a church community to call home? Well, one of them was a 17-year-old Liberta Smith Bentley, who came to Sioux Falls from Mississippi to train as a beautician. Liberta was the oldest of that group of teens, and so technically she's a major reason St. John's Baptist Church existed. Liberta was a powerful singer, and in the church was the one place that she could truly and genuinely experience a wide range of emotions in her singing. 20 years later, at age 37, it's documented that Liberta Bentley approached the lectern to lead the 65 registered member congregation in singing, "Lord, able to make a way." Reverend Matthew Withers preached on the subject on the book of Jonah. At the conclusion of the service, the St. John's community gathered in the basement for a potluck meal. Liberta Bentley was born April 20, 1903, and passed May 19, 1995 at age 92. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. came to Sioux Falls as a guest of the Sioux Falls Knife and Fork Club on January 12, 1961. He started his visit with a reception at St. John's Baptist Church. His 32nd birthday would be 3 days later. Above, in this image here from Argus Leader, he's greeted by Reverend Artie Hayes, pastor of St. John's Baptist Church, and Arthur Mickelbus, secretary-treasurer of the Sioux Falls Knife and Fork Club. King gave a speech that night at the Sheraton Cataract Hotel in which he predicted segregationists in the South would eventually be defeated. Reverend Artie Hayes in the St. John's Baptist Church provided room and board for Martin Luther King Jr. during his stay in Sioux Falls in 1961. Church member Phyllis White recalled feeling immersed in white society on weekdays, but because of church, she felt Black on weekends. The church held an important social and political role in the Black community throughout the 20th century. St. John's and Pilgrim Baptist Church. St. John's congregation was formed in 1921. The church moved to the building on Minnesota Avenue in 1926. It was a place where African American community could gather in comfort and safety. The community base was used for acknowledging births, deaths, weddings, funerals, birthdays, graduations, potlucks, picnics, anniversaries, all kinds of celebrations and gatherings. Before King's arrival in 1961, he was already established as a prominent civil rights figurehead who sought to use nonviolence as a protest to eradicate racism, militarism, and inequality, poverty, and injustice. St. John's Baptist Church members echoed his sentiments. Porter Williams, pictured here, is founder of the South Dakota African American History Museum. He sculpted a life-size statue of Martin Luther King Jr. at Van Ness Park that debuted January 20th, 2020. The statue, which gets defaced and vandalized frequently, is located near the site of the former St. John's Baptist Church, so that's kind of sacred ground for African Americans in Sioux Falls. And it's just a walking distance from the police station and law enforcement offices.
So if the pioneer era was about sort of putting down roots, the community building era, to use this sort of tree metaphor, was sort of building the trunk. And so the early 20th century saw the Black community strengthen their ties as a community and build. And no greater example of that is Louisa Mitchell's California School of Beauty. The beauty parlor has been a gathering place for women where they could try the newest styles, learn about the latest trends, and catch up on town gossip. It was no different a century ago when Louisa Mitchell operated the California School of Beauty in Sioux Falls. There's some public art on a utility box near Minerva's, which is kitty corner from the school that she operated. The beauty industry, attending to women's appearance through makeup and hairdressing, was growing in the 1920s and provided female profession outside of domestic jobs such as housemaids or cooks. And so Louisa Mitchell really built bridges through beautician. Louisa Mitchell was born in 1878 as Louisa Reedon. Her parents hailed from Missouri and Canada. In 1896, Louisa married Harvey Mitchell in Whiteside, Illinois, and both Harvey and Louisa went into the hair business as this sort of barber-beautician duo. The Mitchells relocated to Sioux Falls, South Dakota in 1906, where Louisa opened a beauty parlor in the front of her home at 1218 South Dakota Avenue. A well-to-do woman visited Louisa's shop, and she was so impressed with her work that she reported to a department store owner, A.R. Shriver, that Louisa should set up in his building, his department store at 230 South Phillips Avenue. And so in 1909, Louisa opened the California School of Beauty Culture to be a place to serve clients, but also to teach the trade to women. And so Louisa created this space for women to come together and learn trade skills over this topic of hair. The Mitchells took in students in borders in their home, and census records indicate women came from Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Missouri, and Mississippi. By 1935, Mitchell had been teaching the trade to 12 black operators and 4 white operators. Some of these black women who stayed in South Dakota included Hazel Mahone, Doretta and Ida Moxley, Georgia Grisby Lee, Clarice Coakley, and Liberta Smith Bentley, who Zach mentioned previously. These went on to establish businesses of their own, such as the Moxley Beauty Shop, or Hazel Mahone, who studied under Louisa, moved to Huron, South Dakota, and became a successful business owner and beautician there. Louisa's creation and management of the California School of Beauty in downtown shaped the way South Dakota's women did their hair and ran their businesses, and often created a bridge between black and white women through hairdressing, making this job more in the beauty industry more accessible.
Harvey Bentley and the Get Together Picnics. Harvey Bentley was born in Salisbury, Missouri on August 6, 1897. He moved to South Dakota at 18 years old, living in Yankton, then Mitchell, and then finally in Sioux Falls. In Yankton, he joined the U.S. Army during World War I and fought overseas in France. After his military service, Bentley moved from Yankton to Mitchell and later married Liberta Smith in 1935. Harvey Bentley and other influential black leaders during the Great Depression of the 1930s organized what they called the Get-Together Picnics, which was a family reunion style get-together of the African American community. In the 1930s, the black community of South Dakota was spread thin across the state, with some of the larger communities in Yankton, Mitchell, and Sioux Falls. Harvey and Liberta Bentley lived at 1127 North Minnesota Avenue, pictured above her. Bentley held a variety of occupations such as barber, fireman, working for the Chrysler Surgical Supply Company for over 20 years before he finally retired. In the midst of the Great Depression, half of the U.S. was either unemployed or underemployed, and African Americans were often the first fired and last hired. Economic instability was compounded by the threat of racial violence as the Ku Klux Klan formed in South Dakota in 1921, marching in the downtown Sioux Falls parade in 1924. So last year was their centennial of that. Harvey Bentley and the Get Together Picnics came about to start unifying the community. People from all across the state and other Midwestern states joined in. Library, Heritage, and McKenna Park were locations in Sioux Falls where the gatherings would take place. After a successful first picnic, it was suggested to not only bring the picnic to Sioux Falls, but also rotate it between Sioux Falls, Mitchell, Huron, Yankton, every 4 years, with Reverend Matthew Withers in St. John's Baptist Church, Harvey and Liberta Bentley, and Louisa and Harvey Mitchell serving as chief organizers. The black community of South Dakota was spread thin across the state, with some of the larger communities in Yankton, Mitchell, and Sioux Falls. Due to the isolated settlement of African Americans across the upper Midwest, these get-together picnics were instrumental in helping improve social bonds across the region. The get-together picnics were multiracial gatherings of upwards to a couple thousand people held at McKenna Park. Gatherings included African Americans from upper Midwest, including South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. Lasted until 1962 was the last recorded date for the get-togethers. Harvey Bentley served as state president of the South Dakota Colored Picnic Association for 25 years.
In a related manner, the Sioux Falls chapter of the NAACP served as a vital community function. In some ways, it's related to the Great Migration of African Americans in the early 20th century, who often left the Jim Crow South for the Northeast and Midwest. And in response to that, unfortunately, it was often sort of renewed racism. As sort of Zach had mentioned, in the 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan had been active across the state and in Sioux Falls. And so in 1920, the Sioux Falls branch of the NAACP formed after the lynching of a black man near Omaha, Nebraska. The local organization was created and led by, quote, concerned citizens of both races, as well as the local Jewish community, end quote. To sort of counteract racism and its sort of deleterious effects, many of the NAACP's work was on advocacy and economic jobs building, particularly in the 1930s. Some of the founding members of that were Louisa Mitchell and her brother, William Reedon. Reedon was born in 1885 in Illinois, and he graduated from the University of Iowa Law School in 1909. He then moved to Missouri, where he was a teacher at the Delta Industrial Institute, and he would often come during his summers off to visit his sister in Sioux Falls. He liked the community, and so he decided to move here permanently in 1924 and served as secretary for NAACP. It's then that he would have an extensive correspondence with the founder of the national organization, W.E.B. Du Bois, a famous sociologist and historian at Atlanta University. And the two would often correspond on sort of advocacy work. So for example, Du Bois asked the local chapter in Reedon to fight against the appointment of Judge Parker and pressure senators not to appoint him because they feel like he didn't apply the law equally. They also worked to lobby U.S. Senator Peter Norbeck to ask him to vote for an anti-lynching law in Congress, and Norbeck responded positively that he would vote for this bill. And so this type of work, The Crisis, which was the national magazine for the NAACP, actually honors the Sioux Falls branch in the years 1925, 26, 1931, 32, 54, and 55. This is for the type of advocacy work that they're doing, but also for the donations that they would extend to the national organization. These payments in part bankrolled the NAACP's legal defense fund, including funding the work of Thurgood Marshall and his team of lawyers who successfully argued the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education case before the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Booker T. Washington Service Center was housed in many different buildings over the years. In 1926, the first location was opened at 313 South 1st Avenue. Within a few years, it expanded and was moved to a new building at 415 South 1st Avenue to be able to accommodate more people. January 1932, this second location burned down, and operations were temporarily moved into the home of African-American community leaders Harvey and Louisa Mitchell. A new, larger location was built at 718 South 2nd Avenue that summer. The center again moved in 1948 to 702 East 6th Street, where it remained until it closed in 1957. So it was in 4 different locations, with the one surviving location being at 702 East 6th Street. Next slide. The Booker T. Washington Center was created by Louisa and Harvey Mitchell in 1926. Louisa created the California School of Beauty, which operated out of the Shriver-Johnson building in downtown Sioux Falls. Harvey was a barber. Both were actively involved in the African-American community in Sioux Falls. The green book that you see here to the left was a resource used by African-American travelers with a guide to places they could stop, as far as like hotels, restaurants, service stations, etc., without any fear of racial prejudice or harassment. In Sioux Falls, 2 places were listed. The first being Mrs. J. Moxley at 915 North Main Avenue, and the second being the Service Center at 415 South 1st Avenue. The Service Center was in reference to, obviously, the Booker T. Washington Center here, Throughout the time it was open, the service center served as transitional housing for Black newcomers, where they could stay while searching for their own residences. Maurice Coakley, who would grow to be a prominent voice for civil rights in Sioux Falls, was one such guest. We'll get into that. Let's go to the next one. The Booker T. Washington Service Center also lodged Black travelers visiting Sioux Falls, including actors, athletes, musicians, and maids, and chauffeurs who were accompanying their white employers. In addition to housing, the service center was also an important part of the social and recreational space. It hosted political meetings with keynote speakers, and the Sioux Falls chapter of the NAACP held their meetings in the main room, as did social groups like the Colored Women's Federated Club and the Bronx Women's Club. When the South Dakota Education Association held its annual conferences in Sioux Falls, the center served as a sort of headquarters for Black educators. Each week, Sunday school, choir practices, they were held in cooperation with St. John's Baptist Church. Community members were always welcome over for bridge games, birthday parties, or even just meals. The service center closed in 1957 here, as you can see, stating that Sioux Falls started allowing African Americans to be housed at hotels, motels, and they could dine at restaurants, etc. So that's 1957. But if you remember, Martin Luther King Jr. visited Sioux Falls in 1961, and he couldn't get a rollaway bed at any white establishment. So the struggle for equality goes in fits and starts, kind of like a roller coaster. So it's like, oh, we need it, and then we don't need it, and then we need it, and then we don't need it.
And that provides a good segue into the civil rights era. And so again, to return to this metaphor of the tree, once the roots have been put down and the trunk has been formed, now is the time for those branches to bear those fruits of equality, of equal rights. And that's what the sort of civil rights era is about. An example of this is the Black USO Center. The Black USO Center's origins really go back to World War II with U.S. entry in 1941. And Sioux Falls, the racial demographic of Sioux Falls changes as African American servicemen and their families are stationed in South Dakota, places like Ellsworth Air Force Base in Rapid City and Joe Foss Air Force Base or Air Force Field near Sioux Falls. And with that, at least 300 African Americans would complete training here in Sioux Falls, including Jack Armstrong and his wife, Emma Armstrong. So in 1943, Jack Armstrong is finishing a long day of physical training at Joe Foss Air Force Field. And that night he wanted to go out and relax and have a good time with friends. However, his commander, Captain J.E. Shannon, informed Armstrong and other African American servicemen that they were only permitted to eat at two restaurants, the Canton Cafe and the Hamburger Inn. And so Armstrong was sort of shocked by this proclamation. He was accustomed to Jim Crow prohibitions in the South, but the Georgia native was shocked to find that this racial segregation existed in the North. And so due to the influx of African Americans, there needed a need to create a community center in this place. And so a businessman, a member of the Jewish community named Benjamin Margulis owned a few properties in town and offered one of those properties at 115 North Dakota Avenue to serve as this Black United Services Organization's center, a place for African American servicemen and their families to gather and socialize. It was a place of jazz concerts, of game nights, of performances for singers and comedians. And so while that function was on the first floor of the building, on the second floor was actually some income-adjusted apartments for Black families to live. And so Jack and Emma Armstrong would take up their primary residence before buying a home in there. Because it also had 14 other African-American families, it often formed the nucleus for Black newcomers in that area. Emma Armstrong, who worked as a personal secretary for Dorothy Dave Davenport, Davenport Evans law firm. In some ways was a fierce advocate for racial equality. She mentored many young black children at the center, served as a church mother and organizing events through St. John's Baptist Church, and even being one of the primary organizers for bringing Martin Luther King Jr. To Sioux Falls. And so the center becomes sort of this nucleus for families to come together and to advocate for equal rights.
Maurice Coakley and the Civil Rights Movement. Maurice was born November 11, 1914 in Kentucky. He moved to Fergus Falls, Minnesota at 6 years old with his parents Samuel and Katie Coakley as part of the Great Migration of African Americans who left the Jim Crow South between the World Wars. In 1930, the Coakley family relocated again to Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Due to marital troubles with his parents, Maurice lived at the Booker T. Washington Center his last 2 years of high school. He went to Washington High School until he graduated. Go to the next. Maurice was employed by Minner and Lizzie Greer, an African-American family who owned and operated an auto repair garage. After earning his high school diploma, Maurice worked at the stockyards, sorting cattle, pigs, and sheep for meat processing at John Morrell and Company. After 9 years working there, he was hired as a federal meat inspector for the U.S. Bureau of Animal Industry in 1942. Maurice spent 4 years working as a meat inspector until he decided to start his own business in Sioux Falls called Coakley Porter Service. Coakley married Clarice Sheriff of Mason City, Iowa, who had trained as a hairdresser at Louisa Mitchell's California School of Beauty on December 22, 1935. Maurice and Clarice had 4 boys, Maurice Jr., Eugene, Edward, and Daniel. Okay. In South Dakota, the National NAACP organization called on longtime black leader Ted Blakely of Yankton to form a committee to push the state legislature to ratify the 24th Amendment. Blakely invited Maurice Coakley of Sioux Falls to the Committee on Human Rights along with Dr. Arnett Matchett, Ben Hamilton, and Bill Mahone. Maurice discussed his work with the committee, particularly on racial discrimination at businesses. Coakley and the committee members also cranked up pressure on legislators to ratify the new 24th Amendment. On January 23, 1964, the state legislature voted to approve the 24th Amendment, making South Dakota the final state needed to reach the constitutional threshold of 3/4 of all states. In 1967, following the success of the public campaign orchestrated by the committee, Coakley and Blakely were asked to establish the first statewide chapter of the NAACP in South Dakota. Due to community support he both received and provided, Maurice Coakley became a central figure in the civil rights struggles in Sioux Falls. His participation in civil rights was predicated on the social and economic stability he obtained from the Sioux Falls community. Redlining and housing segregation. So the bad areas would be where black people would be congregating. Black areas is what they call bad areas. So they would deny mortgages and home owning to black people. So black people primarily could only live north or east of downtown Sioux Falls. Maurice Coakley was instrumental with that 24th Amendment in getting the state legislature to ratify that 24th Amendment to be part of the state constitution. Emma and Jack Armstrong broke racial barrier for black home owning, but the 26th Street racial barrier was broken with the Coakleys, the Vaughns, and the White families. So these 3 pioneer families, they lived below 26th Street. The families of Maurice and Clarice Coakley, Theodore and Bessie Vaughn, and Alfred and Bertha White. These were black homeowners in southern Sioux Falls, broke racial barrier to southern Sioux Falls home owning. All of their children attended Jefferson Elementary, Edison Junior High School, and Washington Senior High School. And they lived in between where the colleges were located. And most of their children went to those colleges. So through the Vaughns, the Coakleys, and the Whites' abilities to live below 26th Street, they had to confront restrictions with brazen assurance by demonstrating their strength of character, work ethic, sacrifice for family, and trust to their white friends, employers, and allies to convey on their behalf as an emissary of sorts to help them get deeds of properties in their names.
So like Zach had said, many of their children, like Dan and Ed Coakley, go to the local places of higher education, Augustana College and Sioux Falls College. And so in 1968, the African-American students at these universities find a student organization that they call United Soul. The goal of this student organization is try to make the student recruitment, college staffing, curriculum more representative of the traditions and cultures from which they came. The meeting place for the organization was at 1808 South Menlo Avenue. This home was directly equidistant between both college campuses, and so it was sort of the perfect sort of central point for them to gather together. It was also crucial that Alfred White had the home be an open spot for his daughters in particular to gather with friends at the place. Alfred White arrives in Sioux Falls. He's a traveling shoe repairman who was born in Natchez, Mississippi in 1923, but during the 1940s he is traveling. He goes to Cincinnati, Ohio to work for a while, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. The experience is really memorable for him, and so when he returns and marries Bertha, they decide that Sioux Falls would be a great place to raise a family, and so in 1945 he decides to relocate there. He has 3 children. One of them, his eldest, is Carolyn White, who wants to be a history and government major at Augustana College. His younger daughter, Phyllis White, is a business and accounting major at Sioux Falls College. In some ways, they sort of grow up during the civil rights movement. In 1954, when Brown v. Board decision is made, with the hope that equal funding would follow the racial integration of schools. They're sort of children, school-age elementary school. In 1968, when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, Carolyn's 20 years old, and she's a college sophomore at Augustana. And in some ways, this upbringing brings forth a new wave of social activism to try to transform college campuses while focused on sort of solidarity and love within the Black community. And so in 1968, United Soul is formed to create a dialogue around Black culture and pride. The next year, they present a series of demands for the college administrations, including special scholarships to try to bring more Black and Native students onto campuses. They advocate for a special place that sort of Sam had mentioned to meet and gather on campus. They also advocated or asked for events to help celebrate and uplift Black creativity in all its forms. And so because of this pressure that they were able to put on the college administration, in some ways they respond. In 1971, the Augustana and Sioux Falls College start what's called Soul Days, meant to sort of celebrate Black pride, and they host a number of Black performers, including the poet Sony Sanchez, the actress Ruby Dee, and the sculptor Oliver Legrone. In 1971, Augustana also begins to offer an African-American-centered program of study, formalized by a minor that they called Minority Studies at the time, with courses in the readings with courses such as Readings in the Black Experience, Contemporary Black Movements, and Theology and Nonviolence and Impact of Dr. King. And so this shows that in some ways the civil rights is passed on sort of generationally and is present in places like 1808 South Menlo.
So our history is your future just as much as your history is our future. And I just want to say in South Dakota, African American history is underrepresented for historic properties on the National Register for Historic Places. With the help of the State Historic Preservation Office, the Minnehaha Historical Society, Augustana University, the City of Sioux Falls, and community members just like you all showing up here, we look forward to getting these heritage sites listed on the National Register and receive the local recognition that they truly deserve.
So again, we'd like to thank our sponsors for help funding the work. As part of this, if you're interested, some students at Augustana University through the Plains History website and mobile phone app. So this is a free app that you can download in the Google Play or Apple stores, depending on which phone you use. But we've developed a walking, driving tour that sort of interfaces with the maps function of your phone to guide you to many of these sites. And so if you'd like to check them out and see them for themselves, this tool is available to explore and appreciate. We're surrounded by stories all the time, and we often sort of take them for granted. And so this is a way to show that there's some rich stories that surround us if we only pay attention. So, thanks.
And so now we want to open it up for a Q&A, but before we do that, I want to give a huge shout out and acknowledgement to Paul Dysart. So Paul Dysart sitting right here in the red park. Can you stand if you will? And so Paul is 84 years young, and he was the president of NAACP. He was first to work at the post office. He worked at John Morrell. He did a lot of firsts in Sioux Falls as well. He was the first real estate agent, black real estate agent, and he's a legend. He is a living legend. So a lot of this stuff, I saw him shaking his head like these young bloods ain't got it right, but that's what this is for, to get this out here, and then we have some folks to provide us more context, because this is just what we have researched and what was available. But we want to open it up for Q&A and hear from you all.
It's Mr. Redden. Mr. Redden, that's how you pronounce it. Redden, okay? And he was a special policeman for the Milwaukee Railroad right here. My grandpa was the other one, so I've heard stories about him my whole life. The first house, I believe that you said Greer's was right here, that housed railroad workers. And it became eventually called the Booker T. Washington, but the kind of moves, I'm looking for the research, it kind of moves all up and down 6th Street.
Thanks.
Oh, and Margulies too, Margulies, yeah.
Yeah, so speaking of Margulies, I don't know if anyone caught that, but the Jewish community was involved, a few different times, instrumental times there, with selling the synagogue to the African American community for the St. John's Baptist Church. They were involved in some of the first incorporation of the NAACP in Sioux Falls, and then Margaret's the building. So yeah, he's part of the Jewish community. So I just thought that was interesting that those communities, kind of work together behind the scene. And when we mentioned Dr. Richard Lamb, the first African American in Sioux Falls, in 1878. His wife, German, and then C.C. Yancey, also known as Tom Douglas for some reason. His wife is also German as well. So there's a cross collaboration of communities getting, on a micro scale, even way back in the 1800s, But this is history that is not talked about or that is not prevalent, and it's right underneath our nose, but.
What happened to the church?
What was the question?
What happened to the church?
Oh. Yes.
What happened to the church? We're talking.
Yeah, so St. John's Baptist Church was founded, and then the Baptist Church split into two congregations, Pilgrim Baptist Church and St. John's Baptist Church. And so when those two Baptist communities for a long time worshiped separately, they actually combined back together in the 1980s to form Friendship Baptist Church. And so when those two communities merged back together, that's when they chose to go to a different location for their church. And so, to the best of our knowledge, that property was vacant for a while, and then I don't know the exact date of when it was demolished, but at some period after that, then it was taken down.
And when it was demolished, when it was bought, the registered members of the church was promised to get pieces of the stained glass, something to hold on to, and but that never happened. And so it was kind of like it splintered the community in a lot of ways, and it was very painful. Speaking to some of the folks that have lived during that time, they still reminisce about it, and it's very emotional for them to talk about. Some of them have moved on from Sioux Falls and live in other states, but they still talk about how the unity of that community space was just demolished. Really. Paul, go ahead.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. St. John's Baptist Church. The Dysarts were raised as Catholic in Sioux Falls, and so we weren't full part of either community. So I left the Catholic Church, the Catholic Church left me, and I became a member of St. John's Baptist Church. And we were the victims at that time of a slickster from Chicago who was attending seminary, Baptist seminary. And we found out during that time, in order to be a minister in the Baptist religion, the congregation vote you in. This guy, he was a regular Flip Wilson, if you understand what the sound is. And so he pulled us all together. I went to Catholic Church, I became a Baptist. But when speaking of the church itself, they wanted to, we as black members of the community, we wanted to make it black heritage. City fathers didn't want to hear anything about that, and so it was basically a decision made. And as far as we're concerned, the darker night and heritage and raise it and be done. So that's what I.
Can't do right by everybody who can't go on.
Say what? We want to make a Black History museum.
Oh, I see.
Thank you, Paul. We got another question? Or?
And, Alice Vaughn and Kenny Anderson, Sr., were instrumental in getting two congregations together. And we started doing the history of the Upper Midwest Black History Museum 35 years ago. We did history, and that was over at the new, one of the first events was over at the new church on 14th Street. And that was an effort that was just amazing.
And This was just highlighting 10 of many, many stories. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So there's definitely some stories and things that we wasn't able to crunch in the time that we were allotted. We got a question over here?
Yeah, so you mentioned that the get-togethers ended in the 60s.
Yeah.
Was it, you guys, why? Was it just lack of support? Was there something that significant that happened?
Go ahead.
We don't know exactly why they ended in the 60s. Our sort of hunch or educated guess was that many of the kind of leaders and chief organizers had passed away, moved away, and so some of the principal organizers for that, the South Dakota Colored Picnic Association, no longer were there to serve that function. We also, maybe that after World War II, because the Black community had gotten a lot larger in Sioux Falls, they felt like there wasn't this need to sort of gather from across eastern South Dakota like there was in the 1930s. But we don't know. We don't have good answers. Those are just kind of hunches, guesses.
Yeah, and the South Dakota African American History Museum, we would like to bring it back. I mean, it was a multi-racial gathering. You know, it was just even though it was spearheaded by the African American community, everybody was welcome. And I think that ties into our slogan. This is one Sioux Falls. This is what Mayor Paul Tenhaken coined as our mantra. And so that togetherness, that unification of all of us that call ourselves Sioux Fallians, we gotta live and breathe that. If you don't want to be Sioux Falls, I hear there's a twin cities. That's two cities. We're one city, one Sioux Falls. There's even a quad city.
We tried to get it revived.
It will happen. We're going to speak it into existence. Any other questions or comments or feedback?
Just one thing about Ben Margulis.
Yeah.
My father, back in, I think in 1954, bought 4 acres along the falls for a salvage yard from Ben Margulis. And Ben made some special arrangements so he could
Can't
afford
hear you
it.
over here.
His father bought some land
From
from
Ben Margulis.
from Ben Margulis.
Actually, yeah.
Ben made it happen.
And he would bring flowers to my mother every time he was in town.
And Ben brought flowers to his mother every time he was in town.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Will and Zach for a great presentation tonight. You know, I think we can all agree that one of the great drivers of discrimination and racial prejudice is ignorance. Probably the greatest driver of that, and you'd think here in the 21st century we'd have a little less of that. Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But I think tonight you helped us have a little less ignorance, so we really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Let's give them another hand. As a small token of the Minnehaha County Historical Society appreciation for you coming here tonight, we have a check here for an honorarium for the South Dakota African History Museum. So take this with our appreciation. Okay. We got the 50-50 draw in here, so I'm going to let Zach, if you could draw a number here. Yeah, right, yeah, okay. We'll play the white guys. All right. Okay, the last 3 numbers are 242. I got $22 for number 242. Is there 242 out there? There we go. Okay. So what bar do you want us to meet you all at? Because it's kind of like getting a hole-in-one, you know. It's great to get the hole-in-one, but you got to buy a drink for everybody. Okay, and March 20th, we'll have the South Dakota Veteran Stories with Steve Lindquist and myself. Just a little preview of one of the stories. My uncle Ray Schuring was a World War II veteran. He was a bachelor and kind of a grumpy guy. He kind of scared me, so I never really felt comfortable in asking him anything. But at his funeral, the priest was given the homily, and he told about an experience when Ray was on his deathbed. And Schuring, that's a German name, incidentally. And Ray fought in World War II. And their talk led to heaven. And Ray was a faith-filled man, and Father said, well, do you believe in heaven? He said, yes. He said, you think you're going there? He says, well, I sure hope so. So he thought he would explore that a little bit more. And he says, well, do you know what you're going to do when you get there? Oh, yeah. He says, I know exactly what I'm going to do. He said, what's that? Now remember, Ray Schuring's a German. And he said, I'm going to find all those German boys I shot and killed in the war, and I'm going to tell them how sorry I am. I'll tell you the rest of the story next month. Thanks for coming. Have a good ride home. Good night.
That's why you didn't go. Haircut was not too close.
Sorry.
You have to correct me. Can't mind that. No, start the haircut. That's what the haircut. Full plus field. Now it's that's it. That's a perfect. You must increase your
Still learning.
Jack, you're going for good.
Where can we send the petitions?
They don't live on the wall.
What's good that you know someone is
I have spoken to them, they let me no, I don't think. I
Good job, sir.
We have very Franklin's picture.
I'm really I'm big into World War I. Okay.
What did you do with your kids? Where'd you go?
Do you see when we were walking around in the crew last week? We're trying to go to places. Did you contact with Mark's?
Mark's is one of the people that we
I need to split up with people.
You should ask Cam. He's the one that.
Oh, okay. Taking off? All right, lovely. Thank you.
I need Karen Marks' contact information right away.
Okay.
I have her whole number, and we're doing the NEIA tracking. Wait until you see the film. Are you ready to do some nice film short stuff?
Yeah, sure.
Wait until you see the film we got this year. I'm doing it for the history conference.
How do I end? Oh.
You'll be familiar with Bob Hayes and Homer Jones.